In this series, we talk about what's happening in logistics, freight forwarding, and technology from the point of view of the people making the decisions. In today's episode, we chose to speak about the digitalization of air freight forwarding with a specific focus on the Middle East and Africa. This is Anjad Al-Ajarme, and welcome to the Executive Perspective. Not every market digitizes at the same speed, and that's not accidental. When we talk about digital transformation in air freight forwarding, one of the biggest mistakes we make is assuming that progress looks exactly the same everywhere. So the Middle East and Africa are often grouped together, seen, discussed, and observed as a single market, while in reality, the differences we see are structural, and that distinction is very important. From the executive perspective, working closely with freight forwarding companies across more than 85 countries worldwide, with a strong presence in the Middle East and Africa, we get a clear view of how digital maturity actually plays out. And what we constantly see is that digital maturity across the region is uneven, and that unevenness is not temporary, it's structural. Understanding digital maturity, and this is where global standards start to break down at local borders. So when we assess digital maturity in the MEA region, it makes more sense to stop thinking in terms of a single market. And in practice, it makes more sense to start thinking in terms of high, medium, and low maturity markets. So, for example, you can take some Gulf carriers, for example, EK and Qatar Airways. They do provide world-class digital maturity standards, right? And the same applies to customs authorities in markets like the KSA, the UAE, and South Africa. However, at the same time, other markets in the region are still highly dependent on manual processes. Now, when we look at why some markets are still heavily dependent on manual processes, it usually comes down to incentives. So, from an executive perspective, digital transformation fails when incentives do not support it. And one very important factor here that is often underestimated in digital adoption is labor cost. So in markets where labor cost is more expensive, it has a stronger incentive to digitize. And in markets where labor cost is less expensive, manual processes here can persist longer. Incentives explain why change happens, but competition explains when it happens. The level of innovation among local freight forwarders is often determined by customers' expectations and market pressure. So what looks sometimes like resistance could be rational behavior. Or where digitization happens. So digitization does not happen everywhere at the same time. It happens in specific operational areas. So before we proceed with this, might as well consider or understand that complexity is the default state of freight forwarding. Operationally, digitalization starts with pricing and booking. There's also the electronic airwaybill submissions to carrier, and another core area is shipment tracking, particularly for client visibility. And there's also digital communication with partners and clients. No single party digitizes alone. So a very critical point that everyone has to understand here is that digitalization in air freight forwarding does not depend on the air freight forwarder only. It depends on the entire local ecosystem. And local ecosystems move at the speed of its slowest stakeholder. So a very good question here would be, who are the stakeholders of a local ecosystem? There's the customs authorities that play a major role in enabling or limiting the digital workflow. And there's the ground handling agent, who's also a key stakeholder. And there's the carrier, who determines how open their digital systems are. For example, you can have a forward-thinking freight forwarder looking to invest heavily in technology. But if the carrier, ground handling agent, and the customs authorities are not willing to digitally connect, then the return on that investment is going to be very limited. So for the digital pricing and booking platforms, so globally, they already exist. And they're doing actually excellent in Europe and North America. So for example, we have Cargo5 and we have WebCargo. And what they do is they allow freight forwarders to obtain spot rates from several or multiple carriers at the same time and simply book shipments online. But unfortunately, that's not the case for the MEA region. So the connectivity between these platforms and regional carriers is very limited. And one of the main reasons for that is demand. So freight forwarders in the MEA region are not still used to investing that amount of money on digital pricing and booking platforms as part of their daily operations. And as a result, this limits the incentive for these platforms to prioritize integrations with regional carriers. On paper, electronic airwheel should be straightforward. So platforms like Tax and Cargo Hub and Descartes allow freight forwarders to submit airwheel details electronically to over than 100 carriers that are part of their network. However, this is not the case for the MEA region, as freight forwarders in the MEA region face structural challenges here. Airwheel data isn't needed only by carriers. It's also required by ground handling agents and customs authorities. So in many countries, freight forwarders are forced to submit the same data multiple times through separate systems. So this breaks the standard data flow that electronic airwheel platforms rely on, making the use of them less effective and more redundant. So the most successful digital area, shipment tracking. So shipment tracking is where digitalization has been most successful, and that's because tracking solutions are affordable and accessible, and they face minimal regularity resistance. They also deliver immediate customer value. So finally, digital communication. And this is also an area where it has been growing rapidly. That's also because customers' expectations continue to rise and there are fewer barriers to adoption. Looking ahead, customs authorities are actively digitizing, API-based interactions are becoming the norm, and carriers are expanding their digital connectivity. And from an executive perspective, real digital progress depends on alignment between carriers, authorities, and technology providers. That's what makes digitization practical and scalable, and that's what will ultimately define the future of air freight forwarding across the MEA region. See you soon.